Hi, you guys. I'm gonna quickly go over cell differentiation, which is basically how do cells become different. So as you guys know, there are many different types of cells in your body. There's blood cells, muscle cells, all of lung cells, all of those types of cells, right? But we're gonna spend some time focusing on how they go ahead and how do they become so different from one each other. So, in order to kind of explain this, we kind of have to backtrack a little bit into some of the things that you guys already know about genetics, right? Last unit, we went ahead and we talked about how we go ahead and how we get our DNA from our parents. So, as we know, half of our DNA comes from mom, half of DNA comes from dad, and then that eventually makes this new cell that is going to be a combination of DNA from mom and dad. What we typically have in a cell, and I'm not too much of a fan of this picture, is that we have this cell, and in this cell, we have all the genetic material from mom and from dad, and it's stored inside of this thing that is called a nucleus. Right. And in this nucleus, we have our DNA. And that's pretty much like the big thing that you guys have to know is that in that nucleus, we have that DNA. And this DNA is basically going to be going ahead, it's going to be passed down to all the cells, right? So what happens is that that new cell that we made with our combined DNA, it goes ahead and it splits off into many different cells. So basically, what happens to this new zygote is that we get a bunch of different little cells that come from that cell, right? And all of these cells that are made, the first few stages of development are stem cells, right? And these stem cells, we basically call them stem cells because they go ahead and they kind of provide a way for other cells to go ahead and to become what they need to become in the body, right? Because in a big organism, we need to have a bunch of different cells, but all of these cells that are made and divided and that eventually become your heart, your neurons, and all of that, they all have the same DNA, right? And that is the big takeaway that I want you guys to get through is that no matter where that cell is in your body, they all come from that same DNA, right? But one of the things to kind of consider is that since we have all of these different types of blood cells, you guys, types of cells, we have blood, heart, muscles, gut, lungs, brain, all of that stuff, they all have the same DNA, but how do they become so different? How do they look so different? Right? And so what we have to kind of go back into is that whole idea of epigenetics that we kind of went over um, in unit 4. All of these cells, right, they have the same DNA to pull from, right? And the DNA in our body, it's divided, right? And as you guys know, the DNA in our body, like a small section right here, is a gene, right? And in your DNA, right, you have a bunch of different genes, right? So say if we have a gene here, right, and this is a heart cell gene, right? And then we have another gene over here that happens to be a muscle cell gene. Ah. And then maybe over here we have another one that's a lung cell gene. Right? All of these different genes, like if we went ahead and if we put this all together, right, your DNA basically codes and has instructions for every single type of cell, right? There's instructions on how to become a heart cell and all of that. But in order to distinguish the two, what will happen is that if this particular um, this particular piece of DNA needs to go ahead and it needs to become like this heart cell, right? What will happen is that your body will go ahead and be like, okay, right? You have received directions, right? Because cells talk to each other through different means, and you guys don't really have to get into that, right? But what will happen is that your body will go ahead and it will tell the cell, okay, you got to be going ahead and you got to form into a heart cell. So what will happen is that when your body does this, it will go ahead and it will turn off, right, the genes that it doesn't need, right? So it will go ahead and we will turn these things off. And very similar to what we talked about in epigenetics is that these things are turned off by these methyl groups or the DNA going ahead and it kind of binds together. And if the DNA is bound tightly, all of the little proteins that we need for transcription and translation are not able to get through. So therefore, like that stuff cannot be copied, right? Same deal on here. If the heart cell genes are open and the cell has access to them, right? Then those are going to be the things that the cell is going to basically take through transcription. And because it goes through transcription, then it can later go ahead and to go into translation. So overall, the main deal to kind of get from this is that all the cells have the DNA, right? And it's because of these different combinations of genes that are turned on and that are turned off, right? And if we have all the right things turned on for a muscle cell, then those cells will be destined to go ahead and to become into a muscle cell. If it has everything right to be turned into like a heart cell, heart muscle cell, then again, it's gonna go ahead and it's gonna have all those genes on, right? And then whatever it doesn't need is turned off, right? So since it doesn't need to be a lung cell, since it doesn't need to be like a skeletal muscle cell, then all those different things will be turned off. So that's kind of like the main point that I want you guys to get from cell differentiation. And then next time, we're going to kind of go ahead and we're going to relate how cell differentiation can impact cells that don't act normally, like cancer cells, and how your cells go ahead and usually regulate it. Okay, thank you guys. Hope you guys are staying safe. Have a nice day.